Let's turn this off. All right, now on the other board, I've put up a quote that I think that you have probably heard somewhere before, and I wonder if you can identify where it's from. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Does that sound familiar? You've heard this before? And the idea where it's from.
Speech.
From a speech? And it's not exactly from a speech. It has been given in a speech. And it has variations of it have been given in many speeches. No, it's not Martin Luther King Jr. It is before that, although I'm sure that Dr. King made reference to this in several of his speeches. It seems likely, although I can't think of a specific example. Women's rights activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton made reference to this quote. In a speech, she said, but she changed it to say that all men and women are created equal. But where's the original quote from?
American history, independence,
The Declaration of Independence, very good. This is from the Declaration of Independence. What year was the Declaration of Independence? I know it's not history class, but anybody? This means basically the year that the United States became a country, or is considered to have become a country. I'm a little bit embarrassed for you guys right now. I thought somebody would know this for sure. Okay, 1776. Now, what I want to talk about is what this means. So this is part of the founding document of the United States. And one of the most important documents in the history of the Western world. And we don't have to be American to think so. It's very influential regardless of whether we're American or not. So first of all, do we believe this? We are kind of inclined to think that we believe this, right? This is the sort of thing that we're always taught, right? What does it actually mean? That one human does not have greater value than another. Interesting that slave owners would say such a thing. A little bit inherently self-contradictory there. So when they said all men are created equal, and they said that it was self-evident, meaning that it's just obvious, we don't even need to explain it, it's just obvious to everyone, except for the fact that some of us own slaves, and also all men very specifically does not include women. It's not like they meant to say humans or people, and they just said men instead. They meant like specifically the type of humans that have penises. Because women couldn't vote, right? Women didn't have the same rights as men. So whatever we might think about the sort of hypocrisy of this statement, and I'm suggesting that we should recognize that there's a fair amount of hypocrisy in here, we should consider a couple of things. One is, what is the extension, even if we change this to say people, and not just English-speaking white people, but people, even if we extend that, which is usually the way that we think about it now, right? We would usually think, if we believe this to be true, then we would expand that to all people. What are the ramifications of that? What are the consequences of believing that this is true? There are a lot of interesting consequences that can come about from this. But before we even get to that, I want to challenge this business about self-evident. Now, self-evident, and I promise I'm going somewhere with all of this. You guys are wondering what class you're in right now. It's still English class, trust me. I am going somewhere with this. Self-evident means that it is obvious and doesn't need further explanation. The sun exists, right? You don't need to prove that. Now, I would suggest that this is certainly not self-evident. And they wouldn't have felt the need to say so if it was. If it was completely obvious on the surface, beyond any need for an explanation, why did you say it? Why not say any other number of self-evident things? The sun exists, the sky is blue. I see some wheels turning. This is good. I see some wheels turning. You guys aren't ready to jump in on this yet. But anytime you have a thought now, what does it mean to be equal? So Cohen pointed out, we usually take this to mean that no human is worth more than another human. And what this means by extension is that the law needs to treat everybody as the same. The law needs to be the same for everyone. That's the reason why they said this. Because remember, American colonists in 1776 are coming from a monarchy. They have a king in England to whom laws don't apply as they apply to common people. They have a long history in Europe of noble classes, aristocracies, and there are different laws that apply to different people. And so it was not self-evident that all men are created equal, but that's the statement that they wanted to make. They didn't want to have to justify it. The Declaration of Independence was a statement that we're not going to have kings here. We're all on the same level. We're all on a level playing field. Follow me? So that's the idea behind, that's what they're really saying. They're saying no kings, no dukes and barons and nobles and that sort of thing. That's what they're getting at. So how do we feel about that?
What do you mean?
Well, is this a good thing?
Yes. Yeah.
I like that you guys are hesitant to answer this. So yeah, I think we can say that it's a good thing, right? Equality, hard to argue. You know, we kind of value fairness and we value equality. And so it's hard to reconcile that with the idea of people to whom the law doesn't apply or applies differently. Now, to what extent is this created Is that problematic at all?
No.
No? Does this mean men are created? What does that mean?
God made people.
God made people. Is that problematic? It is if you're not religious, yeah. It sure is problematic. But why do we need this whole created bit? Why not just say born? All men are born equal? I don't know the answer to that. But created is almost like, and it's not the religious implication of that, or the specifically Christian implication of that is troubling, so much as it almost leaves room for interpretation. This whole created equal. So that almost leaves room for all men are equal, or all people, persons, are equal at the start, but then you're not going to be equal after that. And it's pretty hard to argue that anyone is equal. I mean, we're not all the same. It's not possible, and it's probably not even all that desirable that we are all the same. So, to what extent are we really equal?
Equally.
Okay, so this implies like equal in rights and privileges, maybe? Something like that? I would suggest that would be a good thing if that were true. Now, the problem here with created, as opposed to born, is that born equal is not true. We're all born with different sets of advantages and disadvantages and privileges and rights. And that has possibly become less true since 1776, especially since there isn't slavery anymore. But it's certainly not completely the case that we are all born completely equal. The children of billionaires have all kinds of rights and privileges that my children cannot have. And so we can't say born because that's immediately going to be untrue unless we completely change the way that our society works. Created makes it more spiritual, and so that just means, in the sense of like of some sort of the implanting of a soul into each body at some point, that part is equal, but the bodies that you get and the privileges that come with them are not equal, and they're not going to be. But are we comfortable agreeing that we've made a lot of progress towards equality since 1776? And I'm saying we, I recognize that we're not American, but I'm saying we as part of, the same broader culture. We're comfortable accepting that we've made progress, and we're mostly comfortable accepting that equality is a good thing. No?
Not always.
Not always? Okay, I'm interested.
No,
Tell me.
I wouldn't want things, and I prefer losing than tying with everybody.
Okay.
In this case,
It doesn't.
The importance of competition, you'd rather, and I'm just restating this because I'm wearing a microphone and you're not.
Yeah.
You would rather lose than tie all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit on something really important. John, you wanted to respond to
in
that.
this case, it's more about like rights set of abilities, right? So
Yeah.
I'd rather.
Born with a disability.
Yeah.
Yet you're allowed to, I don't know, climb up something, but you physically can't. Are you equal with someone who could?
No, I would suggest that you're not.
So then it's not just based on
Well,
rights.
you're not going to admit to being equal with all of the people who can't play football as well as you,
That makes sense.
right? And so I'm not saying that this is avoidable in some way, but we're getting closer to the reason I'm bringing this topic up in the first place. And John was bringing us closer to it as well. Let me give you a non-physical example of this. So I mentioned the children of billionaires. How much does it cost you to get a university degree?
A lot of money.
A lot of money. How much does it cost the children of really wealthy people to get a university degree?
What if their parents make them pay for it?
What if their parents make them pay for it?
Yeah.
Then that's different, I suppose. But what I'm suggesting to you is if their parents really and honestly make them pay for it, then they can't go to university. If you are wealthy, let's say that your tuition is $20,000 a year, just for the sake of a round number. So your 4-year degree costs you $80,000. Okay, so that's a lot of money, but you pay it, you're done, and then you presumably go on to reap the benefits of now having that degree and having some sort of adult career to follow that up. Now, if you are able to live with your parents during that entire time, and you are able to eat their food, and they're able to provide you with transportation for that whole time, then that university degree costs you exactly $80,000 and not a penny more. But that university degree, if you don't come from a family that happens to have an extra $20,000 a year kicking around to pay for you, that degree costs you a lot more than it costs somebody who already has more money to begin with. Because you have to take out loans, and then you end up paying interest on those loans. So your $80,000 in tuition now costs you probably more like $120,000 overall. You were poorer to begin with, and now you're even more poorer. It costs you even more because you had less to start with. And if your parents don't happen to live in the same city as the university and can't provide you with free transportation and free food, then you also have to add on to those loans the cost of your rent an apartment in the city somewhere, and your food costs and your transportation costs. And now that same university degree has cost you probably at least twice as much, and likely far more than twice as much as it cost someone who already was wealthy to begin with. So, that's not exactly equality. So I have the right, more or less, to that university education, the same as anyone else does if they can, qualify by getting high enough marks in high school or whatever. I have the same right to that, but it's not as easy for me to access that right. Now, would we think that more equality in that area? Now, I hope that I didn't sound terribly bitter about how much it cost me for my university education. And I have 3 university degrees, which cost an awful lot of money. So would it be more fair if that university degree at least, well, preferably was free, or at the very least didn't cost me any more than it cost anybody else? Would that be more equal?
I mean, yeah, it would be.
But are we as a society willing to do that?
No.
Mostly the answer to that is no. I would suggest that perhaps we should be.
Why?
Why don't you have to pay to be here?
Because my parents and a bunch of other people's parents pay tax.
Because, yes, your parents and a bunch of other people's parents do pay tax. But why does that tax pay for this education and not the education that starts the year after you graduate? Why shouldn't it pay for that as well? Right? There's no real reason it shouldn't, and there are many places in the world where the taxes that your parents pay and many other people pay do pay for that education. Now that's just one very narrow example, but the world, as you are probably aware by now, is not a terribly equal place, but we're always kind of trying to make it more equal. And I think that we can mostly agree that making it more equal is generally a good thing. So people born with disabilities, like they are missing a foot, can have an artificial foot made so that they are more equal to everyone else, right? Just to give you a really basic, obvious example, right? And so we generally think that it's good that we can give them the wheelchair or the artificial limb that they need or whatever, to level the playing field, to make people less disadvantaged than they were. We generally can agree, I hope, that that's a good thing. So what happens, where do we stop? At what point do we stop with trying to level the playing field? And that is the theme of the story that I am going to give you to read right now. It is a short story. It's quite short. I think it's only like 5 pages-ish, by a famous writer named Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The story is called Harrison Bergeron. It's the name of the I want to say the central character in the story. I'm not sure that that exactly applies, but the name of the most important character in the story, even though we're not seeing the story from his example. So I am posting the story to the Google Classroom now, and you can read it on there. If you'd prefer and you have headphones, I'm also posting a link to an audiobook version so you can hear it and read along with it if you like, or you can just read it. And there are some response questions to answer. So I wanted to set up this idea of equality just to get, so that we have a background for this is kind of what this story is about. And then we'll talk about it after.